Hello, thoughtful Libra. On August 17, 2026, there is a quieter question surrounding your energy, and it may have less to do with what someone else is about to do and more to do with what you are finally ready to see for yourself. Your heart may be leaning toward one possibility while everything around you keeps adding noise, opinions, expectations, responsibilities, and subtle pressures that make it difficult to hear your own emotional truth. Some of what you have been carrying in your love life may not actually belong to you, and the more carefully you try to keep everything peaceful, the easier it becomes to overlook the fact that something inside you has been asking for greater balance. You may be trying to understand another person's feelings, protect their emotions, maintain the connection, and still convince yourself that everything is fine because there has been no obvious conflict. But peace and balance are not always the same thing, Libra. Sometimes a relationship can look calm on the surface while one person quietly does most of the emotional adjusting underneath it. The message here is not asking you to become distant or cold. It is asking you to notice what happens when you stop automatically carrying both sides of the relationship. This is especially important if you've been giving more than you have been receiving. You may feel emotionally divided, wanting closeness one moment and needing space the next. And there is nothing wrong with acknowledging that contradiction. What matters is whether you allow those feelings to teach you something instead of immediately smoothing them over. Ignoring the discomfort can leave you disconnected from yourself, while overanalyzing every detail can pull you into a cycle where every word, silence, and change in tone becomes something you have to decode. If you have been the one keeping conversations alive, making excuses for delays, softening difficult truths, or finding another way to make the relationship feel stable, it may be time to step back, not as a test, not to make someone panic, and not to create a reaction, but because you deserve to know whether the connection can breathe on its own. Give the relationship enough room for the other person to reveal their own level of intention, because you should not have to constantly balance the scales while pretending that the weight feels equal. For some of you, this may bring a noticeable change in the dynamic. Someone who has been hesitant, emotionally unavailable, or uncertain may begin to understand that your patience should never be mistaken for endless availability. They may become more direct, more willing to communicate, or more prepared to acknowledge what they have avoided saying. But the important thing is not simply whether they come closer. It is how they come closer, whether their actions match their words, and whether their presence carries the kind of consistency that allows trust to grow. That is where the real shift begins, Libra. It does not arrive simply because someone sends a message or suddenly becomes affectionate. It comes through evidence, through the small but meaningful choices that show whether two people are actually willing to meet each other halfway. You may have spent enough time wondering what someone means, what they might do, or whether they are secretly afraid of losing you. Now, the more useful question is whether they are willing to participate openly in the relationship that exists in front of them. You may reach a point where you ask yourself whether this connection is worth the emotional effort you have invested in it. The answer may still be yes, but only if both people are willing to clear away old misunderstandings, speak more honestly, and take responsibility for their own side of the dynamic. There is little room for vague promises, convenient silence, or emotional escape routes when a relationship is asking to become more mature. And for Libra, that maturity may require something that does not always feel comfortable, allowing a necessary disagreement to exist without rushing in to make everyone comfortable again. You do not have to choose conflict for the sake of conflict. You simply have to stop confusing the absence of conflict with the presence of harmony. A healthy connection can survive an honest conversation. It can survive a boundary, a difficult question, a moment of uncertainty, or the admission that something has not felt fair. What matters is whether both people are willing to remain present once the conversation becomes real, because intention is revealed most clearly when comfort is no longer doing all the work. You may notice a different tone from this person, a more sincere conversation, or a greater willingness to make an actual plan rather than leave everything suspended in possibility. Perhaps there is an invitation to reconnect more deeply, but what matters most is what accompanies it. They do not simply show up, they show up with intention. They do not simply tell you that they care. They begin behaving in ways that make care easier to trust, This is not the moment to chase an answer just because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. It is a moment to stand still long enough to see what the relationship reveals when you are no longer managing every emotional detail. Keep your heart open, but do not abandon your discernment. Let yourself remain compassionate without becoming responsible for another person's readiness, because there is a profound difference between supporting someone and carrying them. And remember, Libra, this is a collective reading, so every part of it may not describe your circumstances exactly. Some of these themes may feel remarkably familiar, while others may simply give you something to reflect on without having an immediate place in your life. Take what genuinely resonates and leave room for your own experience to tell you what matters, because astrology and intuitive readings can offer a language for reflection, but they cannot make your decisions for you. Everyone moves through relationships differently. One person may need time to understand what they feel, while another may already know but struggle to express it. What matters is that you do not use someone else's pace as a reason to abandon your own needs. Your path does not have to match anyone else's timeline, and your emotional clarity does not become less valid simply because another person has not reached the same understanding yet. As you move through this energy, the question becomes less about whether someone will choose you and more about whether you are willing to choose a relationship that can meet you with the same honesty you are bringing to it. You are allowed to want tenderness and stability without constantly earning them. You are allowed to expect communication without becoming demanding, and you are allowed to step away from dynamics that repeatedly leave you questioning your own worth. There is also a broader message here about the way you approach your life beyond romance. The same pattern can appear in your work, your finances, your family relationships, and even in the way you make decisions for yourself. You may be highly aware of how your choices affect other people, but that awareness can sometimes become so strong that your own priorities get pushed quietly toward the edge. August 17 invites you to notice that pattern wherever it appears and ask whether you are creating genuine balance or simply making yourself smaller so everything around you can remain comfortable. In your work life, this can mean becoming more comfortable with letting your contribution be visible. You do not need to compete aggressively or become defensive in order to receive recognition. But you also do not need to soften your role so much that other people forget what you actually brought to the table. If you have an idea, a solution, or a meaningful contribution, give it a clear place in the conversation. Collaboration works best when everyone can acknowledge what each person has contributed, and protecting harmony should never require you to erase yourself from the picture. You may also be reconsidering what kind of professional environment actually supports you. Perhaps you will become accustomed to being the person who smooths disagreements, understands everyone's perspective, or quietly adapts when circumstances change. Those abilities can be valuable, but they become exhausting when they are expected from you without being reciprocated. The deeper question is whether your environment allows you to contribute as yourself, or whether you are constantly adjusting your shape to fit what everyone else needs. Financially, the same theme of balance becomes important. Rather than focusing only on what might increase your resources, look at where your energy and money are actually going and whether those choices reflect what you value. You may be learning to distinguish between something that genuinely brings value into your life and something you pursue because it creates an image, maintains appearances, or temporarily makes you feel more secure. There is nothing wrong with enjoying beautiful things or wanting comfort, but financial balance becomes stronger when your choices are connected to your real priorities rather than to the expectations surrounding you. This can also be a time to reconsider agreements, shared responsibilities, or commitments that have quietly become uneven. We do not need to make dramatic changes simply because something feels imperfect, but you can become more honest about what is sustainable for you. When you stop automatically saying yes to preserve peace, you create room to make decisions that are both kind and realistic. That is a much deeper form of balance than simply making sure nobody else is disappointed. Your physical and emotional well-being also deserves that same attention. If you have been carrying tension through your body, particularly around your shoulders, neck, or upper back, give yourself permission to slow down and notice what your body may be holding. Stress can become so familiar that you stop recognizing it as stress. especially when you are constantly thinking about what needs to be handled next. Rest, breathing, movement, and quiet reflection can help you separate what genuinely requires your attention from what you have simply become accustomed to carrying, and emotionally be mindful of the thoughts that keep pulling you back into the same loop. We do not have to solve every uncertainty before you are allowed to feel at peace. Sometimes clarity comes after you stop asking the same question from 10 different angles and begin listening to the answer that has been quietly present underneath all that analysis. The more honestly you listen to yourself, the easier it becomes to recognize which situations are asking for patience and which ones are asking for a boundary. In your family life, there may also be an opportunity to notice the role you naturally occupy. Are you often the one who calms the room, translates one person's feelings for another, or tries to make sure everyone leaves the conversation feeling okay? That ability to understand different perspectives is a real strength, but you are not required to become the emotional caretaker of every room you enter. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for a relationship is allow another person to sit with their own feelings, instead of immediately trying to make those feelings easier for them. That may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you have learned that harmony depends on your ability to soften every difficult moment. But genuine closeness does not require you to remove every rough edge. People can disagree and still care about one another, and a relationship can become stronger when everyone is allowed to speak honestly, without expecting one person to absorb all the discomfort. This is where your sense of balance becomes more mature, not a perfectly level surface, but the ability to remain grounded even when life around you becomes uneven. The overall energy here is less about rushing toward a dramatic breakthrough and more about recalibration. You may find yourself observing more carefully, thinking deeply, and questioning patterns that once seemed normal. That does not mean you are stuck. It may simply mean you are becoming more selective about where you place your attention, your affection, your time, and your trust. Your greatest strength in this moment may be your ability to see more than one side of a situation, but your challenge is remembering that seeing every side does not mean you have to remain undecided forever. There comes a point when understanding becomes another form of postponement, if you never allow yourself to choose. Let reflection lead to discernment, and that discernment eventually leads to an honest choice, especially when you can feel that continuing to carry both sides of the balance is beginning to cost you more than you realize. And as you sit with that awareness, remember that the goal is not to become harder, less caring, or less willing to compromise. The goal is to understand the difference between compromise and self-abandonment, between patience and waiting indefinitely, between harmony and silence, and between being chosen by someone else and choosing what is genuinely healthy for you. That distinction may begin changing the way you see this relationship, your work, your priorities, and the emotional space you are willing to create for yourself, even as the situation continues to reveal what can truly meet you there. Libra, forgiveness may begin to soften something that has been held tightly inside you, much like the earth becoming gentle again after a long rain. But even when your heart opens, keep a quiet sense of discernment with you. You can forgive someone without immediately handing them access to every tender part of you again, especially when that tenderness has already been tested. On August 17, 2026, the emotional focus around you feels less like a dramatic breakthrough and more like a relationship being brought back onto level ground, where you can finally see what is mutual and what you have been carrying alone. The Eight of Wands speaks of movement after hesitation, especially where communication has been delayed or unclear. A conversation may become more direct, a message may carry more intention, or an encounter may reveal something that words alone could not explain. But Libra, the important part is not simply that communication happens, it is the quality behind it. Notice whether someone is willing to be clear, consistent, and present, rather than allowing a brief moment of attention to pull you back into an old pattern. This card encourages you to remain receptive without trying to control the outcome. Let the situation show you what it can sustain when you stop doing all the emotional balancing yourself. The Ten of Cups then brings the possibility of genuine emotional harmony, but not the kind that has to look perfect from the outside. For you, it can represent a relationship where both people are allowed to have different needs, different rhythms, and different perspectives while still choosing to meet each other with care. The beauty is not in avoiding every disagreement. It is in discovering that honesty does not have to destroy connection. There is also a reminder here to let intensity settle before deciding what something means. When emotions rise quickly, it can be tempting to fill in the missing pieces with hope, fear, or imagination. Give the connection enough room to reveal itself through consistent behavior, because lasting closeness is built through what two people repeatedly choose to do, not through one beautiful conversation. The Ace of Cups deepens this message by opening a space for emotional renewal, sincere affection, and a different relationship with your own heart. Rather than asking whether someone is finally choosing you, consider whether you are becoming more willing to receive something that meets you halfway. You may be rediscovering the ability to trust your feelings without immediately questioning whether they will inconvenience someone else. That is part of your renewal, Libra, learning that tenderness and self-respect can exist in the same place, and that being considerate does not require you to become invisible. Love can feel magnetic, but it should also leave enough room for you to remain fully yourself. The star carries a quieter kind of hope. It speaks to the gradual return of trust after disappointment, especially if you have spent time wondering whether your instincts were right or whether you were asking for too much. This energy invites you to reconnect with your own inner sense of direction, instead of constantly measuring yourself against another person's response. Even in a complicated relationship, clarity can emerge when both people become more honest about what they need and what they are actually capable of offering. Then comes death, a symbol of transformation rather than a literal ending. For you, Libra, this may point less toward losing someone and more toward releasing a way of relating that has quietly exhausted you. Perhaps you have been smoothing over difficult conversations, waiting for someone to become ready, or maintaining peace by setting aside what you really feel. The old pattern can change when you realize that true harmony is not created by one person constantly adjusting themselves to keep everything comfortable. That transformation can also create more room for your career and personal life to develop differently. Real change requires patience because you are not simply changing circumstances, you are changing the way you respond to them. Regarding your well-being, pay attention to tension around your neck and shoulders, particularly if you have been carrying stress physically as well as emotionally. Rather than treating this as a definite prediction, take it as a gentle reminder to notice where pressure is collecting in your body and give yourself permission to slow your breathing, relax your posture, and listen inwardly. Your thoughts deserve that same attention. When you repeatedly circle around resentment, fear, or imagined outcomes, the mind can make a small uncertainty feel much heavier than it really is. You do not have to solve every feeling immediately. Sometimes awareness begins with simply noticing what you are carrying and asking whether it still belongs to you. As that awareness grows, you may find yourself responding with more steadiness instead of automatically trying to restore peace around you. In your work life, there may be an idea, contribution, or direction that deserves to be taken more seriously. If you have been hesitant to speak about it because you do not want to create tension with co-workers or make yourself appear too ambitious, this is where greater clarity becomes important. Make your contribution visible without becoming defensive, and choose carefully who has earned your trust with your ideas. You do not need to assume that everyone is against you, but you also do not have to make yourself smaller simply to keep the atmosphere comfortable. There is nothing outside you that gets to define the entire shape of your hopes or ambitions. If your current routine has begun to feel repetitive or disconnected from what matters to you, take that feeling seriously without rushing into an impulsive decision. You may have more than one path available, and the difficulty may be that you have been weighing every possibility for so long that none of them feels clear. Instead of asking which choice will keep everyone satisfied, begin asking which direction feels honest, sustainable, and genuinely aligned with the life you want to build. Sometimes the next step does not have to be dramatic. It may simply mean taking a different road home, visiting somewhere unfamiliar, saying yes to an experience you would normally overthink, or allowing yourself to discover what happens when you stop needing every detail to be settled first. Libra, there is value in letting life breathe a little, especially when you have spent so much energy weighing every possibility. On August 17, 2026, the invitation is to remain patient without becoming passive, because a thoughtful choice still becomes a choice only when you are willing to make it. When it comes to your finances, the energy around you asks for balance more than excess. You may notice opportunities that fit the direction you genuinely want to build toward. But the important question is not simply whether something looks promising, it is whether it supports the life you are actually trying to create. An idea that has been sitting quietly in the background may deserve another look, especially if you can approach it with both imagination and practical judgment. Trust your instincts, but give those instincts a structure, because your strongest financial decisions now come from knowing when to move and when to pause. There may also be older financial habits that deserve to be reconsidered. Perhaps you have been spending to maintain an image, agreeing to commitments because saying no felt uncomfortable, or giving more of your resources than you realized because you wanted everything around you to remain pleasant. This is a good moment to ask what is genuinely valuable to you and what simply creates the appearance of stability. As you become more honest about those distinctions, you may find yourself redirecting your energy toward choices that feel cleaner, more sustainable, and more aligned with your long-term priorities. You may also encounter people or connections that introduce a different possibility, but stay grounded in what is actually being offered. An attractive opportunity can still be the wrong opportunity if it requires you to stretch yourself beyond what is healthy or sustainable. Let momentum develop, without allowing excitement to make every option seem urgent. For you, financial growth is less about making the biggest move and more about creating enough clarity that your resources, time, and effort are working in the same direction. Balance is especially important when it comes to risk. You do not need to become fearful of opportunity, but you also do not need to prove your confidence by saying yes to everything that appears exciting. A measured decision can still be courageous when it reflects what you truly value. The most constructive financial energy around you is the kind that allows ambition and restraint to sit at the same table, so that your desire for more does not quietly come at the expense of your peace. And when we return to love, Libra, one thing becomes very clear. You are unlikely to feel fulfilled for long in a relationship where confusion, manipulation, or emotional imbalance becomes the normal atmosphere. You may be drawn to beautiful connections, meaningful chemistry, and people who awaken something in you, but attraction alone cannot carry a relationship indefinitely. What matters now is whether there is enough honesty and mutual effort beneath that attraction to give it somewhere real to grow. If you are already in a relationship, there may be a sense that the connection has become more stable because both of you have learned how to communicate through differences instead of pretending those differences do not exist. That kind of stability is worth recognizing, but it should not be mistaken for the absence of challenges. A lasting relationship still asks both people to adjust, listen, compromise, and sometimes admit that their first reaction was not the whole truth. Love becomes stronger when neither person has to win every disagreement in order for the relationship to remain safe. You may also be learning that compromise has limits. There is a difference between meeting someone halfway and continually moving your own boundary farther away so the other person never has to meet you. That distinction matters deeply for you now. Healthy harmony does not require one person to absorb every inconvenience, smooth every difficult moment, or translate every unspoken feeling. It comes from two people being willing to carry their own share of the relationship while remaining curious about each other's experience. If you are single, your natural ability to make people feel heard may continue to draw interesting people toward you. There can be something quietly attractive about someone who knows how to create space for another person's thoughts without immediately judging them. But this is also where you need to be careful not to become so understanding that you explain away behavior that does not actually meet your needs. Give yourself permission to get to know someone slowly, not because you are afraid to choose, but because real discernment requires time to see whether chemistry is supported by consistency. You do not have to decide the future of a connection simply because there is a spark. Let conversations unfold. Notice how the other person handles disagreement. Pay attention to whether their actions match their words, and allow yourself to discover who they are beyond the version you first imagined. Love involves two inner worlds, not one person's hopes projected onto another. Different pacing can be perfectly healthy as long as there is still enough agreement about respect, honesty, and the kind of connection both people are trying to create. There is a deeper question underneath all of this. For you, Libra, are you choosing someone because the relationship genuinely fits your life, or because maintaining the connection allows you to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? Sometimes the most difficult thing is not letting go of a person, but letting go of the picture you created around them. When you stop trying to make every relationship look balanced from the outside, you become much better at recognizing where the balance actually exists within it. Family energy can also bring an opportunity to understand this pattern more clearly. Conversations at home may become warmer, more open, or simply more honest, allowing old assumptions to soften without requiring everyone to agree on everything. You may find yourself seeing certain family members from a different perspective, especially when you recognize that different generations often carry different definitions of security, responsibility, and love. Understanding another person's perspective does not mean surrendering your own. And if you're usually the person who notices tension first and instinctively tries to smooth it over, pause before stepping into that role automatically. Ask yourself whether peace is genuinely needed in that moment, or whether someone simply needs to experience the discomfort of an honest conversation. You can be compassionate without becoming responsible for everyone's emotional weather. Sometimes the healthiest contribution you can make to a family dynamic is to remain calm, speak truthfully, and allow other people to carry their own feelings. Small gestures may have more meaning than dramatic displays during this phase. A conversation over dinner, a sincere acknowledgement, an apology that does not come with excuses, or simply being present when someone needs to feel understood can gradually change the atmosphere of a home. Your renewed sense of self-worth can influence those around you, not because you have to become the emotional center of the family, but because people often respond differently when someone begins relating to themselves with greater respect. Harmony becomes more authentic when everyone has room to be seen, rather than when everyone is simply trying to keep things pleasant. As for your own energy, it feels measured rather than extreme. You may not feel completely still, but neither are you being pushed into a frantic state of action. There is room for thought, observation, conversation, and adjustment, and that moderate pace can actually work in your favor if you use it consciously. Your intelligence is one of your greatest resources, especially your ability to recognize several sides of a situation. But remember that understanding every perspective does not mean you have to remain undecided forever. That is where hesitation deserves your attention. There is a form of caution that protects you, and there is another form that quietly keeps you standing at the doorway, long after you already know which direction feels more honest. Fear can disguise itself as endless analysis, especially when choosing one path means accepting that another possibility will have to remain unexplored. You do not need perfect certainty before taking a meaningful step. Sometimes clarity arrives because you move carefully enough to learn something new, not because you waited until every doubt disappeared. So take your time, but give your reflection a purpose. If you notice yourself circling the same question again and again without gaining anything new from it, change one small thing and see what the experience teaches you. Make the call, begin the task, send the application, have the conversation, organize the plan, or simply decide what you are no longer willing to keep postponing. Thoughtfulness is a strength, Libra, but it becomes most useful when it eventually gives your feet somewhere to stand. If you are studying, this same pattern deserves attention. Your mind may be pulled toward relationships, social conversations, messages, or the endless stream of things happening around you. Especially when something emotionally interesting has captured your attention, you might find yourself checking what someone posted, wondering what they meant, imagining what could happen next, and suddenly realizing that an hour meant for studying has disappeared. Bring yourself back gently rather than criticizing yourself, because focus is not about becoming emotionless. It is about deciding which part of your life deserves your attention right now. Create a simple rhythm for yourself and protect it. Give your studies a defined space. Put distractions aside when you can, and remember that the things you are curious about will still be there when your responsibilities are handled. You do not have to choose between having a personal life and pursuing your goals. You simply need to stop allowing one area to quietly consume all the attention meant for another. That too is a form of balance. When it comes to compatibility, Pisces can bring a softer emotional current into your day, with room for empathy, imagination, and conversations that move beneath the surface. Capricorn may connect with your practical side, creating a dynamic where structure and refinement help turn an idea into something more tangible, especially when both of you respect each other's different approaches. Scorpio can bring greater emotional intensity and depth, encouraging you to look beneath appearances and explore what is really motivating both of you. These connections do not need to be treated as guarantees or fixed outcomes. Think of them as symbolic dynamics worth observing. Where does communication feel natural? Where do differences teach you something? And where do you feel that you can remain yourself without constantly adjusting to be accepted? Sometimes compatibility is not about finding someone who mirrors you perfectly. Sometimes it is about discovering whether two different people can create enough understanding, respect, and room for each other to grow. Libra, as you carry these themes with you, remember that a reading can offer a perspective, but it cannot make your decisions for you. Your life is shaped through the choices you repeat, the boundaries you honor, the relationships you participate in, and the moments when you decide to trust what you have learned about yourself. If this message gave you something meaningful to reflect on, you are welcome to support the channel with a like, and if you would like to remain part of this space, you can subscribe and turn on notifications for future readings. Thank you for being here and for sharing this moment of reflection with me. Whether you connect with every part of this message or only one small piece of it, take what genuinely speaks to your experience and leave the rest behind. And as you move forward, may you find the kind of balance that does not ask you to silence yourself, the kind of connection that meets you with equal care, and the clarity to recognize the difference between keeping the peace and finally being at peace with your own choices.